Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
The entire restaurant fell silent as Maya closed her eyes and placed the wagyu on her tongue, knowing one wrong word would cost her everything in front of 50 recording phones. The sneering billionaire expected her to fail his impossible test, but she was about to name the exact village in Japan where this cattle was raised, a precision even he had never achieved. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence that descended upon the Prime Reserve, one of Las Vegas's most exclusive steakhouses, was absolute. Waiters froze mid-step, diners set down their wineglasses, and even the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. All eyes turned to the center table where an impeccably dressed billionaire pointed at the trembling waitress, his booming voice cutting through the air like a blade. His challenge hung in the atmosphere, heavy with contempt and expectation. No one dared intervene until the waitress closed her eyes, took a single bite, and spoke words so precise, so impossible, that they seemed to stop time itself. In that moment, everything would change. Maya Petrova had never imagined her life would lead her here, standing in the glittering heart of Las Vegas, serving cuts of beef that cost more than her monthly rent. She was 28 years old, carrying the weight of an ocean between her and home, juggling double shifts and video calls with her ailing mother back in a small farming village outside Bucharest. The money she wired home each month was the only thing keeping her mother's medical treatments going, the only thing standing between hope and despair. When Maya received the job offer at the Prime Reserve 6 months ago, she'd accepted without hesitation. The restaurant was legendary among Las Vegas's elite, a temple of carnivorous luxury perched on the top floor of the Belmont Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Strip's neon galaxy, while inside the decor whispered old money and new excess. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in Irish linen. The dress code was strict. Servers wore tailored black uniforms with crimson accents, and every staff member underwent weeks of intensive training. Executive chef Marcus Wellington had studied under masters in Argentina and Japan, and rumor had it that celebrities from Hollywood and tech titans from Silicon Valley flew in specifically for his legendary wagyu preparations. The pressure that came with such prestige was extraordinary, but Maya believed the sacrifice was worth it. The tips alone could cover 3 months of her mother's medication. The environment was polished, demanding, and unforgiving. Each day, Maya arrived 90 minutes before her shift began. She polished silverware until it gleamed like mirrors, memorized the provenance of every cut on the menu, and studied wine pairings with the dedication of a sommelier. She learned that when Chef Wellington was in a foul mood, the staff needed to anticipate every need before he voiced it. If the restaurant manager, David Chen, gave special instructions about a VIP table, those instructions were law. Everything mattered at the Prime Reserve: how you walked, how you held a tray, how you described the 45-day dry-aged ribeye to discerning guests. The work exhausted her. But there was something deeply satisfying about delivering perfect service. It reminded her of her grandmother's lessons back home, where precision and attention to detail weren't just professional requirements, but matters of family pride. Within weeks, Maya found her rhythm. She charmed anniversary couples, impressed business executives closing million-dollar deals, and handled demanding tourists with grace. Her first substantial tip, $300 from a software entrepreneur who appreciated her knowledge of grass-fed versus grain-fed beef, went straight into her mother's medical fund. Outside the restaurant, Maya's world was considerably humbler. She shared a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in North Las Vegas with 3 other Eastern European immigrants. Her corner of the living room was partitioned by a shower curtain, her possessions fitting into 2 suitcases. The apartment was noisy, the walls thin, the air conditioning perpetually broken. But they made it work, pooling resources for groceries, sharing stories of home, supporting each other through the particular loneliness of immigrant life. Despite the challenges, Maya was determined to build something better. This job at the Prime Reserve felt like progress, like she was moving towards stability rather than just surviving. So when she clocked in that pivotal Friday evening, she had no idea her entire world was about to transform. It was an exceptionally busy night. Reservations were completely booked, with what manager Chen described as power players and reputation makers. This usually meant hedge fund managers, entertainment moguls, or perhaps a professional athlete trying to remain incognito behind designer sunglasses. The entire staff operated on high alert, as whispers circulated that a particularly notorious figure might make an appearance. Chef Wellington obsessed over details in the kitchen, personally inspecting each plate, while his sous chefs worked with surgical precision. That was the evening Jackson Murdoch walked through the doors of the Prime Reserve. Known in culinary circles as the Kingmaker, Jackson had built an empire of upscale restaurants across 3 continents. His fortune came not just from his establishments, but from his ruthless business acumen in buying struggling restaurants, gutting their identities, and rebuilding them into profitable machines. Forbes estimated his net worth at $3 billion, though Jackson himself claimed the number was deliberately underestimated for tax purposes. He rarely granted interviews, preferring to let his reputation speak for itself. Media coverage painted him as brilliant but brutal, a man who allegedly fired entire kitchen staffs on opening night if a single dish disappointed him. Stories circulated about chefs who'd suffered breakdowns under his criticism, servers who'd been publicly humiliated for minor errors. Some called him a visionary who demanded excellence. Others called him a tyrant who confused cruelty with standards. Food critics either praised his uncompromising pursuit of perfection or condemned his treatment of hospitality workers as borderline abusive. But to the staff of the Prime Reserve tonight, he was simply Table 12, and that designation alone sent anxiety rippling through the restaurant. Maya, having studied the evening seating chart during her pre-shift briefing, knew he was the last-minute VIP edition, the kind of guest who might order a $5,000 bottle of wine without glancing at the price. She wasn't originally assigned to his table, but fate had other plans. Sarah Kim, the server designated for Table 12, called in sick 30 minutes before service began. Food poisoning, she claimed, though Maya suspected the real cause was terror. Manager Chen's face tightened as he surveyed the dining room, calculating options. The other senior servers were already managing full sections. His gaze landed on Maya. "Petrova," he said quietly, pulling her aside. "You're taking Table 12. Her heart stuttered. "But, sir, I've only been here 6 months. Shouldn't someone with more experience—" "There is no one else," Chen interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You know the menu backwards and forwards. You're professional, you're composed, and frankly, you're all I've got. The unspoken rule here is absolute. You never refuse an assignment, especially not for a guest of this caliber. Understood?" Maya nodded, swallowing her apprehension. She found a pristine tray, reviewed her notes on the evening's specials, and prepared herself mentally to serve Jackson Murdoch, billionaire restaurateur, legendary perfectionist, rumored to destroy careers with a single negative comment. Taking a steadying breath, she approached Table 12. Jackson Murdoch appeared younger than his 52 years, though his steel-grey eyes held the hardness of someone who'd seen and orchestrated too many failures. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, probably Italian, certainly expensive. His watch was a platinum Patek Philippe that caught the light with understated arrogance. Beside him sat 2 associates, both impeccably dressed, both radiating the nervous energy of people accustomed to walking on eggshells around their boss. At an adjacent table, two bodyguards attempted discretion while failing entirely, their earpieces and rigid postures announcing their purpose. Maya approached with practiced poise, shoulders back, expression calm, a professional smile carefully measured. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her slight accent adding an unexpected warmth to her words. "Welcome to the Prime Reserve. My name is Maya, and it will be my privilege to serve you this evening. May I start you with cocktails, or would you prefer to see our wine selection?" Jackson glanced up from his phone, his expression already annoyed, as if her very presence was an interruption. "Wine list," Jackson muttered without looking at her, his fingers continuing to fly across his phone screen. "Something suitable for wagyu, and make it quick. I don't have all night." One of his associates, a thin man with nervous eyes whose name Maya would later learn was Richard Sterling, offered an apologetic smile. The other, a heavy-set man named Douglas Park, stared at his menu as if willing himself invisible. Maya nodded professionally and retrieved the leather-bound wine list, her mind already calculating which selections might satisfy a palate as allegedly refined as Jackson's. She returned moments later, her approach silent and precise. "We have an exceptional selection of Japanese wines that pair beautifully with wagyu, sir. There's a Chateau Mercian Omachi from Yamanashi Prefecture, 2015 vintage, with notes of cherry and white pepper that complement the richness of—" "I didn't ask for a lecture," Jackson cut her off, barely glancing up. "Bring the Penfolds Grange, 2012. And don't waste my time with theatrical presentations. Just pour it." Maya's stomach tightened, but her face remained serene. "Of course, sir. Would you like to begin with any appetizers this evening? We have a remarkable beef tartare prepared with—" "We'll start with your tasting menu," Jackson interrupted again, his tone suggesting her questions were beneath him. "All courses, and tell your chef I want the wagyu cooked exactly medium rare. Not medium, not rare. Medium rare. If he can't manage that, I'd rather eat at a chain steakhouse." The associates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maya maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. The tasting menu at the Prime Reserve was a journey through 6 carefully orchestrated courses, each designed to showcase Chef Wellington's mastery. It typically took 3 hours to complete, and every element required split-second timing. "Absolutely, sir," Maya replied, her voice steady. "I'll ensure Chef Wellington receives your specifications precisely. For the other gentleman?" Richard ordered quietly, his voice barely audible. Douglas simply nodded, indicating he'd have the same as Jackson. Maya collected the menus and headed toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of Jackson's dismissiveness settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. In the kitchen, controlled chaos reigned. Chef Wellington stood at the pass, his critical eye scanning every plate that left his domain. When Maya submitted the order for table 12, his expression shifted from intense concentration to barely concealed anxiety. "Medium rare for Murdoch," he muttered, reading the ticket. "Of course. The man who thinks he invented beef cookery wants to test me." He turned to his team. "This is perfect execution or nothing. The wagyu is the Takayama A5. I want 3 minutes sear each side, 30-second rest, and I want it plated like it's going to the Smithsonian. Am I clear?" The sous chefs murmured their understanding. Maya grabbed the Penfolds Grange from the climate-controlled wine vault, its price tag equivalent to 2 weeks of her wages, and returned to table 12. She performed the presentation Jackson had specifically said he didn't want, because protocol demanded it regardless of guest preferences. He waved dismissively, allowing her to pour without comment. As Maya moved through her other tables, a couple celebrating their 10th anniversary, a group of doctors discussing a medical conference, a solo diner absorbed in his tablet, she couldn't shake the anxiety coiling in her chest. Every 15 minutes she circled back to table 12, refilling water glasses, ensuring wine levels remained optimal, checking if the gentleman needed anything. Each time, Jackson barely acknowledged her existence, treating her like a necessary inconvenience rather than a person. The first courses emerged from the kitchen like works of art. Seared scallops with yuzu foam, wagyu carpaccio with truffle oil and microgreens, a delicate miso-glazed black cod that practically melted on contact. Maya delivered each plate with practiced elegance, describing the components in concise terms that avoided Jackson's ire. He ate in silence, occasionally making notes on his phone, his expression unreadable. Douglas and Richard, by contrast, seemed genuinely impressed, murmuring appreciatively after each bite. But they too remained largely silent, clearly trained not to speak unless Jackson invited conversation. The dynamic at table 12 created a bubble of tension that seemed to radiate outward, affecting nearby diners who couldn't help but sense something significant was unfolding. Then came the main course, the moment everyone had been anticipating with equal parts excitement and dread. Chef Wellington rang the bell with unusual force, signaling that table 12's main course was ready. Maya moved swiftly to the pass, where 3 identical plates awaited her attention. The wagyu was breathtaking, perfectly marbled cuts with a seared crust that glistened under the kitchen lights, resting on a minimalist arrangement of roasted vegetables and a delicate red wine reduction. Each plate was a masterpiece, the culmination of decades of culinary expertise and hundreds of dollars worth of Japanese beef. Maya lifted the tray with practiced care and navigated through the dining room. Other servers instinctively moved aside, sensing the importance of this delivery. She arrived at table 12, her movements fluid and professional, and set each plate down with quiet precision. "Gentlemen, your Takayama Wagyu medium rare with seasonal vegetables and a Barolo reduction. I hope you enjoy." For a moment, Jackson simply stared at the plate before him. He picked up his knife and fork, cut into the beef with surgical precision, and examined the interior. The meat was perfect, a warm pink center graduating to a caramelized exterior, the marbling distributed like a work of abstract art. He took a bite, chewed slowly, his expression giving nothing away. Then he set down his utensils and pushed the plate forward with deliberate force. "This," he announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "is unacceptable." Maya's heart dropped into her stomach. "Sir, is something wrong with the preparation?" "The temperature is off," Jackson declared, his voice rising. "I asked for medium rare. This is medium. Do you understand the difference, or is that too complex for someone like you?" The surrounding conversations dimmed. Diners at adjacent tables turned their attention toward the confrontation, some curious, others uncomfortable. Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "I apologize, sir. I can have Chef Wellington prepare another—" "I don't want excuses," Jackson snapped. "I want competence. This is supposed to be a world-class restaurant, yet I'm being served overcooked meat by a waitress who clearly doesn't know the first thing about quality beef." He gestured dismissively at the plate. "Take this away, and while you're at it, bring your manager. I need to speak with someone who actually understands hospitality." Richard and Douglas both stared at their plates, mortified but silent. Maya felt the familiar sting of humiliation, the powerlessness that came from being publicly berated by someone who wielded wealth like a weapon. Years of similar moments flashed through her mind. Customers who'd snapped their fingers at her, clients at her previous job who'd treated her like furniture, border agents who'd questioned her right to work in America. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her voice carefully controlled. "I'll get Manager Chen immediately." As she turned to leave, Jackson's voice followed her, deliberately loud, meant for the entire section to hear. "You know what the problem is with restaurants these days? They hire anyone. No standards anymore. Just warm bodies who can carry a plate. This place used to mean something." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she walked toward the manager's station, But she kept her spine straight, her pace measured. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Behind her she could hear the uncomfortable shuffling of other diners, the whispered conversations, the collective sense that they'd just witnessed something ugly. Manager Chen's expression tightened when Maya explained the situation. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and headed toward table 12 with the practiced diplomacy of someone who'd diffused countless difficult situations. Maya followed at a respectful distance, dreading what would come next. Chen approached the table with his most conciliatory smile. "Mr. Murdoch, I understand there's been some concern about your entree. Please accept my sincerest apologies. I'd be honored to have Chef Wellington prepare a replacement, and of course this course will be removed from your bill." "I don't want a replacement," Jackson interrupted, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "What I want is to ensure your staff actually knows what they're serving. This waitress," he gestured dismissively at Maya, "clearly has no understanding of quality beef. So let me propose something." He paused, his steel-grey eyes sweeping across the dining room, ensuring he had maximum attention. Several tables had stopped eating entirely, watching the scene unfold. "Bring me 3 different cuts of wagyu," Jackson continued, his voice carrying across the room. "Don't tell her which is which. Let's see if she can identify the origin. If she can't—" He smiled coldly. "Then maybe she should find work that better suits her skill level. After all, why should I trust a restaurant that employs servers who are worthless at their jobs?" The word worthless hung in the air like a slap. Maya felt every eye in the restaurant turned toward her, measuring her, judging her, waiting to see if she would crumble under the billionaire's contempt. Manager Chen's face had gone pale, his mind clearly racing through the implications. If he refused the challenge, he'd insult Jackson Murdoch, potentially destroying the restaurant's reputation. If he accepted, he'd be throwing Maya to the wolves, gambling her dignity and possibly her job on an impossible test. "Mr. Murdoch," Chen began carefully, "I don't think it's appropriate to put my staff in such a position. Then perhaps you're not the right person to manage an establishment of this caliber," Jackson interrupted smoothly. His associates shifted uncomfortably, but neither spoke. "I'm offering your waitress a chance to prove she belongs here. Unless you're admitting you hire people who can't differentiate between quality products. It was a trap, expertly constructed." Chen's jaw tightened. He glanced at Maya, apology and desperation warring in his eyes. The unspoken message was clear. This was beyond his control. If Maya refused, she'd be seen as incompetent. If she accepted and failed, she'd be humiliated. Either way, Jackson had engineered a scenario where he couldn't lose. Maya's mind raced. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to walk away with what remained of her dignity. She thought of her mother back home, of the medical bills piling up, of the money she sent each month that kept hope alive. She thought of her cramped corner behind a shower curtain, of her 3 roommates counting on her share of rent, of the precarious foundation she'd built in this foreign country. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A memory from childhood, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen in their village outside Bucharest. The old woman's weathered hands, holding a piece of meat, teaching a young Maya the secrets passed down through 4 generations of butchers. "Close your eyes, you Birea Mea," her grandmother would say. "Taste tells stories that eyes cannot see. The grass the animal ate, the minerals in the water it drank, the air of the place it lived, everything leaves a signature." Maya had spent her childhood learning this skill, accompanying her grandmother to farms across Romania, developing a palate so refined she could identify not just breeds, but regions, sometimes even specific farms. It was a gift her family considered both blessing and curse, extraordinary but utterly impractical in the modern world. She hadn't used it in years, hadn't needed to in her life of serving other people's meals. "I'll do it," Maya said quietly. The dining room collectively held its breath. Manager Chen looked at her with something between admiration and horror. Jackson's smile widened, predatory and confident. He genuinely believed he was about to humiliate her, to prove his superiority, to demonstrate why people like him deserved their power, while people like her deserved to serve. "Excellent," Jackson said, settling back in his chair like a king preparing for entertainment. "Chen, have your chef prepare 3 samples, different cuts, different origins. Let's make this interesting." He pulled out his phone, tapping rapidly. "I'm documenting this for my Instagram. My followers will appreciate seeing real standards enforced." Maya's stomach churned, but her expression remained calm. Chen hurried toward the kitchen, returning moments later with Chef Wellington, whose face was a mask of barely controlled fury. The chef hated Jackson for this spectacle, but he was also professional enough to recognize that refusing would be career suicide. "What cuts do you want?" Wellington asked tersely. "Surprise me," Jackson said, "but make sure at least one is genuinely challenging. I don't want this to be too easy for her." His tone made clear he believed no level of difficulty would matter. He expected Maya to fail regardless. Wellington nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now. Other diners had abandoned any pretense of eating, fully invested in the drama unfolding at table 12. Some looked sympathetic toward Maya. Others seemed eager to witness her humiliation. A few pulled out their phones, clearly planning to capture whatever happened next. Maya stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her, her breathing slow and deliberate. She was preparing herself, reaching back through years of memory, awakening the skills her grandmother had taught her, the girl who could taste the limestone in a lamb's diet, who could identify which side of a valley a cow had grazed on, who could distinguish between animals raised in morning sun versus afternoon shade. That girl was still inside her. It was time to remember who she really was. Chef Wellington emerged from the kitchen carrying a simple white plate with 3 small portions of beef, each approximately 2 inches square, seared identically to mask any visual differences. He set the plate on table 12 with barely contained anger at being made complicit in this degrading spectacle. The cuts looked nearly identical to the untrained eye, marbled, perfectly cooked, indistinguishable. 3 different wagyu samples, Wellington announced curtly. "All A5 grade, all prepared identically. That's all I'm telling you." He stepped back, crossing his arms, his expression making clear whose side he was on. Jackson gestured magnanimously at the plate, his phone positioned to capture Maya's anticipated failure. "Whenever you're ready, sweetheart, take your time, though I doubt it will matter." Maya approached the table slowly, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She was aware of every eye in the restaurant, of Manager Chen standing rigid near the kitchen door, of Richard and Douglas staring at their laps in discomfort, of Chef Wellington's protective stance. But most of all, she was aware of the weight of this moment, how it would define not just her evening, but possibly her entire future in this city. She picked up the fork and knife Wellington had provided, cutting a small piece from the first sample. Before lifting it to her mouth, she closed her eyes and took a slow breath, exactly as her grandmother had taught her. "Clear your mind of expectations," the old woman's voice echoed in her memory. "Let the meat speak its truth to you." Maya placed the first bite on her tongue. Immediately, sensations flooded her awareness. The initial burst of umami richness, the way the fat dissolved almost instantly, coating her palate. But beneath that obvious excellence, she detected subtler notes. The mineral content spoke of iron-rich soil. The grass the cattle had eaten carried whispers of coastal vegetation, a salinity that suggested proximity to ocean air. The marbling pattern, the way the fat distributed through the muscle, told her about movement patterns. These were cattle that had roamed, not been confined. She chewed slowly, thoughtfully, letting the meat reveal its secrets. The finish had a clean sweetness that came from specific grain supplements, but the underlying flavor profile was distinctly grass-fed with mineral supplements. The texture had a particular tenderness that spoke of both genetics and careful raising. Kobe beef, Maya said, opening her eyes. From the Hyogo Prefecture region, likely from cattle raised in the northern farming areas where the soil has higher mineral content. The animals were grass-fed, supplemented with grain in the final months. I'd estimate from the Tajima bloodline based on the fat distribution pattern. The room was utterly silent. Jackson's smug expression faltered slightly. He glanced at Chef Wellington, who stood with his arms still crossed, but now wore a look of genuine surprise. Wellington nodded almost imperceptibly. She was correct. Not just generally right, but specifically, impossibly accurate. "Lucky guess," Jackson said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Anyone can identify Kobe. That's entry-level knowledge. Try the second one." Maya was already reaching for it, her confidence building. This wasn't luck. This was her inheritance, her grandmother's legacy flowing through her veins. She cut a piece from the second sample and brought it to her lips. This beef sang a different song. The marbling was even more pronounced, the fat content higher, creating an almost buttery texture. But it was the subtle variations that told the real story. The grass here had different notes, less mineral, more sweetness, suggesting volcanic soil rich in nutrients. The cattle had been raised in a cooler climate. She could taste it in the way the fat had developed, and there was something else, a distinctive quality that came from specific breeding protocols and traditional raising methods. She chewed carefully, analyzing, letting her trained palate decode the information most people couldn't even detect existed. The finish was longer, more complex, with layers of flavor that unfolded like a symphony. These cattle had lived in a specific type of environment, higher altitude, cooler temperatures, pristine water sources. "Matsusaka beef," Maya announced, "from the Mi Prefecture, raised in the mountainous regions. These cattle were massaged regularly and fed beer supplements, which creates this particular fat distribution. The sweetness in the finish comes from the specific grain mix they use in that region. I'd say these animals were female, which produces the higher fat content and more refined flavor profile." Chef Wellington's jaw actually dropped. Manager Chen's eyes had gone wide. Even Richard and Douglas had looked up from their laps, staring at Maya with something approaching wonder. Around the dining room, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people had their phones out now, recording this impossible display. Jackson's face had gone rigid, his confidence visibly shaken. He'd expected her to fumble on the first taste, maybe make a generic guess. Instead, she delivered two impossibly specific identifications, detailing not just regions, but raising methods, feed protocols, even the gender of the animals. This wasn't supposed to happen. "The third one," Jackson said, his voice harder now, stripped of its earlier mockery. This was no longer entertainment. This had become a challenge to his authority, to his expertise, to everything he believed about hierarchies and who deserved respect. "This is the one that will expose you. I guarantee it." Maya looked at the final sample. It appeared identical to the others, perfectly marbled, expertly seared, unremarkable to anyone without her particular gift. But she knew this was the test Jackson had been saving, the one he believed would be impossible. She could see it in his posture, the way he leaned forward slightly, his phone still recording, but his attention now fully focused on her. She cut a small piece, but before tasting she paused. Her grandmother's voice came to her again, clear as if the old woman stood beside her. "When you face the most difficult challenge, that is when you must be most patient. Rush, and you will miss the truth. Be still, and the truth will reveal itself. Maya closed her eyes and placed the third bite on her tongue. The initial sensation was extraordinary. The marbling was exceptional even by A5 standards, the fat content creating a texture that was almost ethereal. But it was what lay beneath that surface excellence that made her breath catch. This was different from anything she'd tasted in years. This meat held a story so specific, so precise, that for a moment she was transported entirely out of the Las Vegas restaurant and back to a lesson with her grandmother when she was 12 years old. The grass these cattle had eaten was unique. She could taste altitude in it, mountain vegetation with specific characteristics. But more than that, she detected trace elements that spoke of a particular type of soil, the kind found only in certain mountainous regions of Japan. The water the animals had drunk carried mineral signatures of volcanic sources, filtered through specific types of rock. The marbling pattern itself told her about genetics. This was Tajima bloodline, but a particular strain, one bred for generations in isolation to maintain specific characteristics. The fat had developed in a way that only happened with cattle raised in cooler climates, with careful temperature regulation. These animals had lived in an environment of precise control, traditional methods passed down through generations. And then she caught it, the signature that made this beef utterly unique. A subtle variation in the finish, a ghost of flavor that came from cattle raised in a specific microclimate. The grass carried notes of cedar, suggesting forests nearby. The mineral content spoke of a particular valley formation. The tenderness indicated massage techniques specific to a traditional raising method. Suddenly Maya was 10 years old again, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen while the old woman described a legendary beef she'd tasted once in her youth, before the wars, before the borders changed. From a village in the mountains of Japan, her grandmother had said, where they raise cattle like royalty, each animal known by name. The village was called Takayama, and their beef was unlike anything in the world. Maya's eyes snapped open. "Takayama village," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Gifu Prefecture, Japan. This beef comes from cattle raised in the traditional Takayama method, in the mountain valleys where the climate and soil create unique conditions. The animals are fed a specific blend that includes local grains and are raised with massage techniques that have been used in that village for over 200 years. The mineral content in the water there is distinctive because of volcanic filtration through specific geological formations found only in that region." She paused, then added with absolute certainty, "This is the original Takayama of 5 wagyu, from the village itself, not from the broader Gifu region. You can taste the cedar forests in the grass, the mountain water in the finish. This is as specific as beef gets." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if the entire restaurant had stopped breathing. Manager Chen stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Chef Wellington had uncrossed his arms, staring at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. Richard and Douglas both looked stunned, glancing between Maya and Jackson with expressions of disbelief. But it was Jackson's face that told the whole story. His expression had gone from confident to shocked, to something approaching horror. His phone had slipped slightly in his grip, still recording but forgotten. His carefully constructed superiority had shattered like glass. Because Maya was exactly right, down to the village. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The moment stretched like pulled taffy, fragile and surreal. Then Chef Wellington began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The sound broke the spell. Manager Chen joined in, then several nearby tables, then more, until the entire restaurant erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, restrained clapping. It was genuine, thunderous, the kind of applause reserved for unexpected miracles. Jackson Murdoch sat rigid in his chair, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Shock gave way to embarrassment, embarrassment to anger, anger to something darker, the rage of a man whose entire worldview had just been challenged by someone he'd dismissed as worthless. His associates remained frozen, uncertain whether to congratulate Maya or comfort their employer. "That's impossible," Jackson finally managed, his voice hoarse. "You couldn't have... There's no way you just guessed that specific..." "She didn't guess," Chef Wellington interrupted, stepping forward. His voice carried across the dining room with authority. "What you just witnessed was one of the rarest talents in the culinary world. This woman has a palate that most chefs spend their entire careers trying to develop. She identified not just regions, but specific villages, raising methods, even the gender of animals. That's not luck, Mr. Murdoch. That's extraordinary skill." The chef turned to Maya, respect evident in his expression. "Where did you learn this?" "My grandmother," Maya said quietly, her voice shaking slightly from adrenaline. "She was from a family of butchers in Romania. She taught me to taste the stories in meat, where it came from, how the animals lived, what they ate. I've been doing it since I was a child." "And you've been working as a server?" Wellington shook his head in disbelief. "You should be consulting, teaching, working with suppliers. This is a gift." Jackson stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "This is ridiculous. You probably cheated somehow. You and your chef probably planned this to embarrass me. You knew I was coming." "Mr. Murdoch," Manager Chen interrupted, his earlier deference replaced by quiet steel. "Your challenge was your idea. The cuts were selected by Chef Wellington without anyone's input. There was no opportunity for coordination. What you witnessed was authentic." Around the restaurant, phones were everywhere now, capturing Jackson's meltdown, recording his accusations, documenting his humiliation. Several diners were already typing frantically, clearly posting to social media. One woman at a nearby table called out, "That was incredible! You go, girl!" Others murmured agreement. Jackson's jaw tightened. He glanced around at the phones, at the faces watching him with expressions ranging from admiration for Maya to contempt for him. This was a public relations nightmare unfolding in real time, and for a man who'd built his empire partly on image and intimidation, the implications were catastrophic. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career," Jackson hissed at Maya, though his words lacked their earlier conviction. "Do you know who I am? I can destroy this restaurant. I can make sure you never work in hospitality again. One phone call and..." "No, you can't," a voice called out from a table near the windows. An older woman in elegant designer clothes stood up, her posture radiating authority. "I'm Caroline Martinez, food critic for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. I've been recording this entire exchange. What I just witnessed was a talented young woman being publicly humiliated by a bully who couldn't stand being proven wrong. If you try to retaliate against her or this restaurant, I will make sure every food publication in the country knows exactly what happened here tonight." Another diner stood up, a man in his 60s wearing an expensive watch. "I'm Gerald Hoffman, hospitality attorney. If you attempt any action against this woman or this establishment based on tonight's events, you'll have a lawsuit on your hands so fast it'll make your head spin. What you did tonight constitutes workplace harassment, and it's been documented by dozens of witnesses." More people were standing now, a wave of support forming around Maya. What had started as Jackson's attempt to humiliate a powerless worker had transformed into a referendum on his character, witnessed and judged by dozens of influential people. His attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly. Jackson looked around the room, his expression a mixture of fury and calculation. He was smart enough to recognize when a situation was unsalvageable. Without another word, he threw several $100 bills onto the table and strode toward the exit, his associates scrambling after him. The bodyguards followed, leaving a wake of stunned silence that quickly dissolved into excited conversation. Maya stood trembling, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal. She'd expected to be fired, humiliated, possibly deported. Instead, she'd somehow become a hero. The moment Jackson Murdoch disappeared through the restaurant's entrance, the dining room erupted. Diners who'd been silent witnesses moments before now crowded around Maya, offering congratulations, asking questions, requesting photos. Manager Chen tried to maintain order, but even he seemed overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his quiet server into an overnight sensation. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen," the anniversary couple told her, pressing an extra $100 into her hand. "Please take this. You deserve it after what you just endured." The solo diner with the tablet approached, introducing himself as Marcus Chen, a food blogger with 500,000 followers. "I live-tweeted the entire thing," he said, showing her his phone. "You're already trending. Ushana Takayama waitress has over 50,000 tweets. People are calling you the palate prodigy." Maya stared at the screen, watching the numbers climb in real time. Videos from multiple angles showed her tasting the beef, her moment of concentration, her confident identification. Comments flooded in from around the world. "This woman is a genius. Jackson Murdoch finally got what he deserved. Someone give her a TV show." Chef Wellington pulled her aside, his usual stern expression softened by genuine respect. "Maya, I need to ask you something serious. Would you be interested in consulting for my supplier relationships? I source beef from around the world, and having someone with your talent to verify quality and authenticity would be invaluable. I'm talking about a significant additional income beyond your serving wages." Before Maya could respond, Caroline Martinez, the food critic, appeared at her elbow. "I'd like to write a feature story about you for the Review Journal. Your background, your grandmother's teachings, how you ended up here. I think readers would be fascinated. And between us, after tonight's display, other restaurants are going to be competing for your expertise." Maya's head spun. Hours ago, she'd been worried about making rent. Now she was being offered consulting work, media features, opportunities she couldn't have imagined. It felt surreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Gerald Hoffman, the hospitality attorney, handed her his card. "If Murdoch or anyone else attempts retaliation, call me immediately. What happened tonight was witnessed by too many people for him to spin any narrative. You're protected, but I want you to have my number just in case." Manager Chen finally managed to guide Maya toward the back office, away from the growing crowd. Once inside, he closed the door and let out a long breath. "Maya, I owe you an apology. I should have never put you in that position. When Murdoch made his challenge, I should have refused, should have protected you. Instead, I was too concerned about the restaurant's reputation to defend my employee. I'm sorry." Maya shook her head, still processing everything. "You couldn't have known. I didn't even know if I could still do it. I haven't used that skill in years." "Well, you can now," Chen said with a slight smile, "and after tonight, I suspect you won't be working as a server much longer. Not that I want to lose you, but someone with your abilities is destined for bigger things." He paused. "The owners of the Prime Reserve want to speak with you tomorrow. They're already discussing how to incorporate your expertise into our brand. They're talking about having you do exclusive tasting events, consulting on our beef sourcing, maybe even developing a specialized menu." Maya felt tears threatening to spill over. She thought of her mother back in Romania, waiting for the monthly wire transfer that kept her medical care going. She thought of her cramped corner behind a shower curtain, of the years of struggle and silent endurance. And she thought of her grandmother, who'd taught her this skill in a tiny village kitchen, never imagining it would one day change her granddaughter's life in a country halfway around the world. "Can I take a moment?" Maya asked quietly. "I need to call someone." Chen nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. Actually, take the rest of the night off. Your section is covered. Go home. Process this. Rest. Tomorrow is going to be intense. Maya stepped out the back entrance into the cool Las Vegas night. The Strip's neon glow painted the sky in artificial colors, and the distant sound of traffic hummed like a constant heartbeat. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart, watching the international connection light up. It rang 4 times before her mother answered, her voice thick with sleep and concern. "Maya, what's wrong? It's so late there." "Mama," Maya said, her voice breaking with emotion, "something incredible just happened. I need to tell you about it. And I need to tell you that everything is going to be okay now. Better than okay." As she began recounting the evening's events, Maya looked up at the artificial stars of Las Vegas, feeling for the first time since arriving in America that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally, truly living. 3 months after that fateful night, Maya stood in a very different kitchen than the one she'd known at the Prime Reserve. This space was hers, a professional tasting facility and consulting office in a modern building near the Las Vegas Arts District. The walls displayed framed articles from Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, and the Las Vegas Review-Journal, all featuring her story. A large photograph showed her grandmother in Romania, smiling proudly in her butcher's apron, the woman whose gift had changed Maya's life. The viral video from that evening had exceeded 30 million views across various platforms. The Takayama waitress had become a cultural phenomenon, sparking conversations about workplace dignity, hidden talents, and the dangers of judging people by their circumstances. Jackson Murdoch, attempting damage control, had posted an apology video that was widely criticized as insincere. Several of his restaurant partnerships had quietly dissolved, and industry insiders reported he'd become significantly less influential in culinary circles. Maya's life had transformed beyond recognition. She now consulted for a dozen high-end restaurants across 3 states, verifying beef authenticity and advising on sourcing. The Prime Reserve had hired her as their Director of Quality and Provenance, a position created specifically for her skills. Her salary allowed her to move into a proper apartment, send substantially more money to her mother, and even begin saving for the future. But what gave her the most satisfaction wasn't the money or recognition. It was the platform she'd gained to help others. She'd established a scholarship fund for immigrant hospitality workers, helping them pursue culinary education. She partnered with worker advocacy groups to push for better treatment and protections in the service industry. And she'd become an unexpected spokesperson for recognizing the hidden talents that exist in people society often overlooks. Today, she was hosting a small gathering, a tasting event for hospitality students from the local community college. 20 young people, many of them immigrants like herself, sat around the table, eager to learn. Maya had invited Chef Wellington to co-teach, and together they were demonstrating how to identify quality ingredients through taste and texture analysis. "The most important lesson I can teach you," Maya told the students, "is that your background, your story, your grandmother's kitchen, these aren't limitations. They're superpowers waiting to be discovered. My grandmother taught me to taste the world in a piece of meat, and I thought it was just a quirky family skill. Turns out it was my greatest asset. What skills are you carrying that you haven't recognized as valuable yet?" A young woman from Honduras raised her hand shyly. "My mother taught me to identify coffee beans by smell alone. We grew coffee back home, but I thought that was just normal." Maya smiled. "That's not normal. That's exceptional. Let's talk about how you could use that in the specialty coffee industry. You're sitting on a talent that roasters pay consultants thousands of dollars for." As the session continued, Maya caught Chef Wellington's eye. He nodded approvingly, clearly moved by watching her empower the next generation. After the students left, he lingered for a moment. "You know," he said, "that night with Murdoch could have destroyed you. Instead, you transformed it into something meaningful. That takes real character." Maya thought about that evening, the fear, the humiliation, the moment she decided to trust herself despite the risks. "Sometimes the worst moments create the biggest opportunities," she said, "but only if we're brave enough to show the world who we really are." That night, as she locked up her new office and walked to her car, Maya called her mother. The conversation was in Romanian, filled with laughter and plans for her upcoming visit home, a trip she could finally afford. When they hung up, Maya sat in her car for a moment, reflecting on the journey from that small farming village to this moment. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Taste tells stories that eyes cannot see." The old woman had been teaching her about more than beef. She'd been teaching her that value exists in unexpected places, that skills passed down through generations matter, that dignity belongs to everyone regardless of their job title. And so ends the story of how a single moment of courage transformed a struggling immigrant waitress into a recognized expert, how one billionaire's cruelty backfired spectacularly, and how a grandmother's kitchen lessons became a catalyst for change. Maya's journey reminds us that our heritage isn't a burden to overcome, it's a treasure waiting to be shared with the world. Thank you for reading. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share and subscribe for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Let us know in the comments. What hidden talent do you have that you've been underestimating? And remember, no matter how invisible you feel, you have gifts the world needs to see.